Welcome. This is the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast, where we have conversations around the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I am one of the hosts. My name is Patrick Cadigan. I do have a co-host, and who would that be?
My name is Meghan Smallwood, and I'm a public school transition coordinator. So today we are lucky enough to have Audri Levering with us, who is the transition program coordinator at Parents Place of Maryland. And thank you for joining us, Audri.
Thank you for asking me to come today, Meghan and Patrick.
Yeah, and I know we talked a little bit beforehand, so I'm very excited for the conversation. For everyone who's joining us, do you mind just telling a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to Parents Place of Maryland?
Sure. My role at Parents Place of Maryland is I am the transition program coordinator, and it has been quite the journey getting there. I'm a native Texan, don't hold it against me. My personal professional background is I was a speech and language pathologist. I worked primarily in hospitals, and when my first child was born, she had a number of medical complications at birth. Um, Doctors weren't really quite sure. She was in the NICU for about 6 weeks. I had a healthy pregnancy, but by the end of her time in the NICU, she'd had every possible test done. The doctors kind of decided that this was a child that had a genetic syndrome, but they didn't have a name for it. I always say that my journey to my role here kind of started in my job as a speech language pathologist, but but once I had a child with a disability, that is what really started me on my journey of understanding the parent's role, right? Because I was a provider for so long. And all of a sudden, without kind of any, some parents know that they're going to have a child born with a genetic syndrome. I did not. And so it was quickly into this role of being a parent of a child with a disability. And even having that background, I found it extremely challenging. I became a stay-at-home mom. My husband travels, quickly had another child, and we moved to Maryland when my daughter was approximately going into the 5th grade. Oh, I need to back up a little bit. Since she didn't have a diagnosis, my journey was one of her preschool years were full of doctor's appointments and therapy appointments. Parents, I had this dream of play dates, and it quickly became about all of that, right? That's my other passion. I always like to talk about this a little bit, is that my passion is absolutely transition age youth, but because of my personal journey, I have a special place in my heart for those families that have rare conditions, right? Because it's a lot of unknowns, not a lot of answers when you go to the specialists, not a lot of support groups. So you feel very isolated while still trying to support and do the best for your child and then find answers. So it's a unique place to be. Anyway, that's just a little segue, my other passion. So when we came to Maryland, I moved to the Eastern Shore. And I moved from Austin, Texas. Wow, that's a switch, isn't it? But we live on Kent Island, close to Annapolis, but also close to access the Eastern Shore. And then I was continued to be a stay-at-home mom, but I have always from the beginning been passionate about going to training, continuing education, whatever I could find. And so when I moved to Maryland, I found the Parents Place of Maryland, did several of their trainings, and always kind of had a connection there. And when my daughter was in 9th grade, a job came open. I applied and I got it. So my first job with the Parents Place in Maryland, I've been with Parents Place 3 years. I was the parent educator for the Eastern Shore. So I supported families and did trainings for families on all 9 counties of the Eastern Shore. And then after about a year and a half, I became the transition program coordinator, and I helped to develop information, fact sheets, trainings, anything related to transition age youth. And then I also keep supporting families as a parent educator on the Eastern Shore.
That's awesome.
Tell me about Parents Place of Maryland. What is it? How would you describe it?
Every state has a parent training and information center. Okay, there's multiple ones in the more populated states, but when they wrote the laws, when they wrote the special education regulations, they knew that parents were going to need help. So, and in those regulations, it says that they should be staffed mainly by parents of children that have disabilities. So everyone that works at Parents Place in Maryland has a child with a disability or a very close loved one. So what we are is we are Maryland's Parent Training and Information Center for parents of children with disabilities and special healthcare needs. We serve families across the entire state of Maryland. The mission of Parents Place of Maryland is to empower families as advocates and partners in improving education and health outcomes for children with disabilities and special healthcare needs with a commitment to diversity and equity. Okay, so we serve families across the entire state of Maryland. And then we were established in 1990, and we are governed by a board of other parents. What we mainly do is we provide one-on-one assistance, share resources, do a lot of trainings to professionals and parents, and we have special military outreach. We help parents better understand their child's disabilities. We help them to learn to communicate more effectively with other professionals. We help them understand their rights and responsibilities and benefits in healthcare systems. And we help them understand how to resolve disagreements. We help connect them with the community. And we really emphasize relationships and partnerships and collaboration.
Very cool. I actually didn't know any of that. So
They are a wonderful resource.
I've known about the resource for a long time, but it was kind of one of those things that very similar to DD councils. Like that was something also recently, like I figured, oh, every state has one.
Mm-hmm.
And, not understanding that they're required to.
I like the military part because I've had families who have had to leave with children with severe disabilities. And I was kind of like, I don't really know where to send you. So it's a great connection to have.
Yes, thank you. I know we have so many military families in Maryland. So there are, 24 jurisdictions in Maryland? And when I was the parent educator for the Eastern Shore, I covered 9 counties, just as my sole job. So we really value parents because we understand that parents need support, right? Mm-hmm. So we take a lot of calls from parents. If a parent would like our assistance, you go to our website. There's a purple Contact Us tab. You put in your information, very simple, take you 30 seconds, your name, email, and then somebody will be in contact with you, usually in 24 to 48 hours, at least to initiate the process. And then we go from there. And we are just kind of, sometimes I say I'm 1-800, I need help. Yeah. But we help lead parents in the right direction to get resources. We're not content experts. We're not attorneys. We are not advocates. That's another common misperception. We are not special education advocates. We, try to help parents understand where I was when my daughter was born. And that is why I applied to Parents Place in Maryland, because I do think that all of the rights of our children were hard fought by many other parents and advocates. And I know about how to be a good parent to a child with a disability because of other parents, and I want to pay it forward. And I've always been, in a helping profession and that type of thing. So yeah, it's a wonderful organization to work for. And I appreciate the partnerships and all the great people I'm meeting, like you guys.
Yeah, it's a great organization. And like you said, it reminds me of a parent who told me years ago, and it always stuck with me. The parent is the constant. We are there till maybe 21, and the parent will be there for life. So it's so important that they have the resources and know moving forward what, everything about their child.
It's true. We say that a lot to parents too. And it's like, and sometimes you need to take a step back. We say that's okay too. Families have multiple different responsibilities. And parents in large part are doing the best that they can. What they do, it's one step at a time. You gain a little bit of knowledge every year. But yeah, thank you for asking about our organization, because I forgot to mention that myself.
I just jump right in because I'm like, Parents Place, yes. And I know your daughter. So how old is your daughter now?
My daughter's 19.
Okay, so she's still in her transition journey. And can you share a little how that's been on that side? Because I know you have the whole side as the professional now, and now you're experiencing it yourself. So best of
Yes,
both
yes.
worlds.
Best of both worlds. So I will say it's terrifying, but I say, like any difficult journey, the hardest part was the first step. I
Mhm.
say that about getting on the treadmill. Like it's always the hardest part getting there. But once you're there, once you start making the first steps and you slow down, you realize there's people like you guys, right? There's people in the school system to support you, there's other agencies, there's other groups. Taking that first step, reaching out for support, and taking one step at a time. Once I started doing that, everything just really started going smoothly. I know there'll be bumps in the road, but I think it just accepting, like, okay, it's time to do this. And we're so lucky that the state of Maryland wants us to start. Well, we do start at age 14 or earlier.
And we definitely try to promote earlier. I know in our county, we've been working a lot in the middle schools to try and get the information disseminated. But it's hard. Like you said, it's overwhelming, it's scary, and I think a parent needs to be in that place and ready to hear it. But I think if we just keep sharing it with them, hopefully they'll hear it sooner.
Yeah. And what really got me to take that first step, like anything else, my approach to raising my daughter is I'm going to give this my all, right? So if the state of Maryland says it's a good idea that I need to start doing this now so she can have a better future, okay. Right. That's my job as a parent, right?
Hmm.
I'm not doing myself any good. I'm not doing her any good if I don't at least try to follow the recommendations for kind of the best standards to help your child become an adult that has their best quality of life. And that's always been my driving philosophy. Whatever it may be, we're going to help her have the best quality of life that she can have as a child, a teenager, and an adult.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. I think it's recommended 14 for a reason. So, let's take that into consideration. And you're right, there's a lot. And I know when I sit with families, it's so overwhelming. I can see the look on their face after we go through the whole transition timeline. And I try to reassure them it's just piece by piece, like you said. And it's so many times I feel like the ones that start at 14 that are the most overwhelmed, but willing to do the research are the ones at 21 that I'm like, can you come back and talk to parents for me? Because now you are the well-versed parent, who started out as scared as anything. So,
I've been the grateful recipient of many wonderful school professionals that have told me it's okay. You know what I mean? And I
mhm.
think that's what we tell families all the time. It's about the partnership, it's about the relationships, it's about the collaboration. And I've always been heard the most when people say, I hear you. It's
Mhm.
hard. Take a deep breath. And then it's like, but we got to get down to business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So you
exactly.
validate the feelings while still moving towards the action pieces.
Right. It's okay to have those feelings, but you're right. You need that support system to lean on. And I think it's so important when you're able to connect with other parents who are in your shoes or have gone through that experience too. So they can tell you and you can believe it will be okay.
I'm particularly fascinated, I will have to say, because Audrey, you are bringing the discussion. I will tell you that when Meghan and I were first discussing the idea of this podcast, these conversations that we were going to push out there, the Eastern Shore was where my brain went to because I have family who are on the Eastern Shore. In fact, I have family on the Eastern Shore who were part of the education system. And so just, kind of hearing them talk about things. And then when they found out what I was interested in and they were like, oh, transition, I don't feel like there's a lot of that out here. And really, tell me about that. And, so that has always been part of, where the brain goes when, having those discussions is, well, what is it like for the families who have never heard it before? Okay, let's ask these questions. Let's talk about these things.
Yeah, similarly, I do adult life planning with an organization for the autism waiver, and I have families on the Eastern Shore. And I'm well versed in our county, so when I start researching for theirs, and from what I've heard them say, it's very different. It's a very different experience. So I think that's why when we do our discussions, we talk about a lot of places in Maryland, but we also reference the fact that every state is different. And I've had parents who don't, when they start thinking for the future, maybe retirement and things like that, and they're like, oh, we might move to California. I'm like, well, you need to stop and think for a second. I don't want to burst your bubble, but you need to do the research because it's not going to carry over.
Right? What I tell all families is there's no perfect utopia place that
Hmm.
will magically provide every resource that you need for child. If there is, I want to hear it. if
I want to
somebody
go.
if somebody's found it, we're going to all have a mass exodus there. But no matter where you go, you're going to have to, when your child is young, you're going to have to learn to be an advocate for your child. You're going to have to learn about their disability and how it impacts them. And you're going to have to, depending on your child's needs, you're going to need to learn about the systems of the state.
Yeah.
So yeah, you are exactly right. And then to what you were saying, Patrick, there are, even within our state, there are vast differences in the resources, and more rural, right? The more rural the area, the less. But what I tell families, because we can't, as you can see, I have a very neutral mindset. I've lived in a bunch of different states. My job is to support parents. What I tell parents is like, where you live may not have this, but think about the good things there. Like my daughter knows everyone. So my daughter's first job experience was at Walgreens. And it was a work-based learning experience through doors, pre-ets. And when I picked her up every day, there was literally 2 to 3 people that she knew, because I live in a small town, that came in. So, I consider that an advantage for my daughter, right? Even though I live in a small town and it can be hard to access some things, she's developing a community of support of people familiar to her. And there are some people that would come in just to see her every day. So there's advantages. So my point is, embrace the pros of where you are. There's going to be some cons, but there's going to be some pros too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you were saying too, as you're an advocate yourself for your child, it's also so important to teach them about their advocacy for themselves, so when you're not there and they are in that community, whether it's small or big, they can make their needs known and they know who they can go to for that support as well. And I know that kind of ties into some of the things you've been working on and making sure they have a choice and a say in things. Because I was going to ask about something you've been working on with Parents Place of Maryland, if you would share a little bit.
Yes, I would love to. At the Parents Place of Maryland, I am working on a grant to develop materials, trainings, and videos on the topic of supported decision making.
That is phenomenal. And I know that word has been passed around. Those words have been passed around. And we've talked in other conversations about alternatives to guardianship versus guardianship. But do you mind sharing a little bit about what that means?
Sure. I'm going to give a definition. It's going to sound a little rigid, but I think everybody likes a good definition,
Yeah.
right? So, supported decision making is when a person with a disability exercises their right to make decisions for themselves while accessing a support network and tools of their choosing.
And so how is that different than guardianship? Because I know as soon as parents, are approaching 18, the first question out of their mouth a lot of times to me is, how do I get guardianship? I need to get guardianship.
So there's a really big difference, and that's a really good question, Megan, because I feel like everybody knows guardianship is the first go-to, and then some people know about supported decision making. So the main difference, and I think to back up a little bit, let's talk about the big so what here. Why do we need to even be thinking about this? Because at the age of 18, our children are now adults. So when you're an adult, they call that, like the age of majority. So when you're the age of majority, everyone should be presumed to make their own decisions in life, that they're capable of making their own decisions in life. And then at the age of majority, there also comes kind of the rights and responsibilities of being an adult. A lot of parents, boy, 18 sneaks up on us. And we don't think about that. And then and I say this with the utmost amount of love and respect for all parents and all individuals with disabilities, but parents think they're going to have an eternal child. And it's not, they don't mean harm by that, but it's just they think, this is the most important thing to me in my life, and I will continue to love and care and make decisions in their future. But the law doesn't look at it that way. At 18, that individual with a disability is an adult. Then there comes decision making rights. Okay. So when an adult at 18 is not able to make decisions for themselves, or doesn't want to, or isn't willing to, doesn't have the desire to make decisions for themselves, that is when an individual, usually the parent, can petition the court for guardianship. Now, that is another thing that confuses parents a lot. They think, well, isn't a doctor, isn't a school, isn't somebody going to refer, me and my family? No, if that is the choice, with careful family decision and other information by doctors, other people, it's the parent's job to start the process to petition for guardianship. Now, guardianship is a legal decision made by a judge. Okay, so it is a court process, a court procedure.
The most restrictive one, too.
And the most restrictive one. Guardianship basically means a judge has decided that individual cannot make decisions for themselves. Okay. Then the judge appoints a guardian. Okay. It is not necessarily the parent. At that point, when a judge decides that this is an individual that needs to be under guardianship, the true guardian of that individual is the court.
Mm-hmm.
Then the judge, the court, appoints someone to be the guardian. And then there's certain rules that have to be followed over the years and that type of thing. It can be challenged, and it takes away some of that individual's rights, which includes voting in some states, the right to marry, some other medical health. So it takes away some basic human rights. So it is the most restrictive, and the general rule from almost the National Guardianship Association, all the attorneys associations, the general rule is that you should always try the lesser restrictive options first, like supported decision making, before initiating the guardianship process. I tell families, think of it like LRE in school.
That's
right?
A good comparison.
Yeah. You should try the lesser restrictive options first, always. And then if it's not working or other reasons, then go to guardianship, because you're taking away a person's basic rights.
Right.
And that is a decision that not to be taken lightly.
Right.
You
bring up a good point, though. I don't think, even going through the process, a lot of families realize that the court is the guardian, and you are reporting back to them with a lot of things. And I think that surprises people after they go through the process, and they're like, well, what is this I have to fill out every year? I have to check on every year. So you are reporting to somebody. It's not just, that's it. And I know it's frustrating, like going back to what you said, thinking of your child as the eternal child, because I know some families I've worked with that at 18, they get very frustrated because they're in their mind, I'm the mother, I should have this say. And I say, I understand that, but they are technically an adult. And think of, if you have an 18-year-old who's getting ready to go to college, you wouldn't have a say there. So unfortunately, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it is true. And parents, I think you see it too, is like their intentions are good,
Yeah.
but sometimes, this is with all parenting, like even not having a disabled child, over parenting, overdoing things for any child can cause more harm than help.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but we want to protect our children. So that's where I go back to keep learning as a parent. I know we're all we're also overburdened with time, but as much as you can, try to attend. I know you got all school districts offer training through like their Partners for Success, their CCAC, the Autism Society, listening to this podcast, because I have to tell you, I probably heard about supported decision making when my daughter was younger, and it didn't really sink in. But I feel like supported decision making is one of those things that you have to layer. Like you have to hear a couple times and then it starts making more sense. But we really want to think about, well, I want to add this. When I attended those trainings, some of the things that really caught my ear were all the research says self-determination and self-autonomy is the key to a good quality life. There's loads of research, right? The national core outcomes. There's a lot of research that says like the key to a good quality life as an adult with a disability is self-determination and self-advocacy. So those are the things that kept, when I said our premise for raising my daughter was for her to have the best quality of life as possible. It's those nuggets that I heard that I really, really hung on to. But I'd love to talk now about supported decision making.
Yeah, and I would love to hear it, because I feel like too when I present to families about guardianship and the alternatives, and I explain a little bit, like I know you will, about they have their choice heard by people that they select as that person that to help share with. Many families feel like their child cannot cognitively make those choices, so I have to do guardianship because they're not going to be able to tell me this. So it's so important to realize that everyone can make choices, and it just looks so different, and it's something that needs to be valued.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that sometimes when I meet a parent like that and they say that, I say, what decisions can your child make now? And sometimes they're stuck. And I understand there's a broad spectrum of individuals with disabilities. My daughter does have an intellectual disability, but even amongst individuals with intellectual disabilities, we recognize there's a broad spectrum of communication challenges.
Yes.
Right? Different modes of communication that people use. But you've got to build that opportunity to practice making choices for this to be a feasible option for your student, your child in the future. Okay. Yeah. So if a parent says that to me and my child can't make choices, I say, can we start with one thing? Let's start with one. You and I together, what is one thing? Breakfast. Can you give your child, do you want to eat this or that? Choosing your clothes in the morning. And I will tell you, my issue was I was a bit of a control freak. Because I think that you become accustomed to that. But right around the age of 12, another nugget that somebody told me was, it is also, I tell parents this all the time, do not do for them what they can do for themselves. And when I took a step back and I saw everything that I was doing for her, that she could do for herself, it was a very eye-opening moment for me. Now, was some of that because it made my life easier? Yes. She makes lunch. It's a ginormous mess.
Right.
Well, then that becomes a ginormous mess for her to clean up. But you're right. Thank you for asking that, Meghan, because I'm really passionate about that, because I see too many parents not seeing it as an option because they haven't even explored the first baby steps.
Yeah. And like you said, it can be the smallest choice. What you want for breakfast, waffles or pancakes, the color of your clothes. But I think, like we said before, starting with that least intrusive way and trying it out, because no one's going to come at 18. There's no guardianship police that's going to come and say, you need to get this right now. So if you're still deciding and you're still researching, try this least restrictive way first. And I know it's so hard when people want you to say, what should I do? And I say, you have to do what's best for your family, but I encourage you to look at all the options. And supported decision making is a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing, that I tell families that helps. You've got to start the conversation. What do you do when you get, like you said, you meet families, you get a no? And it can be hard, but it's like, okay, so let's think. But then I say, okay, well, why don't you think about yourself for a moment? When you are making a decision or any decision, big or small, do you yourself get help from people? Well, yes, we all do. My sister is an accountant. Who do you think I go to when I have a question about something to do with accounting? My brother-in-law is a mechanic. I go to my brother-in-law. So what I try to do is I try to normalize it. Then it gets us thinking, are we creating these false barriers and biases for people with disabilities for things that me as an individual without a disability, I do. So why couldn't my daughter do that? So I think people think about it as like a project, but it's really just life.
Yeah. And I think what I hear some parents say is that they're so concerned of their child being taken advantage of. And financial and medical are those two areas that they really have concerns of. And I know you and I have talked about it too. When you get into that world that doesn't necessarily understand the world of disabilities as well as we do, you do meet people who aren't as familiar and may not understand it. But if you are advocating and you are well versed in what you have in place for your child and stand by it, it's totally possible.
Remember, it's not, you can build in those alternatives together. It's not, that was a huge aha moment for me. It's not just guardianship or supported decision making. Okay. So when my daughter turned 18, we made sure that we spoke with her. We went through the proper channels and and it was okay with her. We did medical and financial power of attorney paperwork. My daughter is going to use supported decision making with medical and financial power of attorney, which she wanted her parents to be a part of that too. So you can combine all these supports. There's many other like ABLE accounts, payee, there's a lot of other supports that can be put in place with the supported decision making. And that I think is confusing, but the more you read about it, you more learn about it, it becomes options. And yes, we get a lot of questions about safety too. But the research actually says that individuals that make their own decisions lead safer lives.
That's great. Great research.
Yeah, it's because they practice.
Yeah.
They get the opportunity to practice. They get the opportunity to practice speaking up for themselves. Sometimes an individual just has not had an opportunity to practice these skills. Yes. And like you said, people are worried about safety, but there is nothing in guardianship that also keeps your child safe. Okay. So an individual can commit a crime under guardianship and be charged. That's the reality of the other side too.
It's not a free pass.
It's not, you're exactly right. You're still an adult, right? You're still an adult. So, but with supported decision making, I think that a lot of people don't know that the new law was passed. So right now, parents are like, okay, this is great. Now, how do we do it?
Yes, exactly.
And that's what we're in the process of kind of building some materials and some frameworks. But with the new law, one important thing for parents to know, well, first of all, something that also I think is really important is people have the right to make decisions with supports. So what does that mean? That means that I can go with my daughter to the doctor and I'm allowed to go with her and I'm allowed to support her in that appointment. She has that right. People also have the right to make a written supported decision-making agreement about what type of support they want and who they want supporting them. So I always like to make that distinction to families because they're kind of two different things. You don't have to have a formal agreement. It's recommended because I think it just makes things simpler, but individuals have that right. And because of the new law, other providers, bankers, doctors, they are supposed to allow
Mm-hmm.
that individual to have that support with them as that individual chooses. And I think that's really the mind shift. Parents spend their whole life being the decision maker, and you are switching now to the supporter.
Well, and it's not something like you said with all those other providers, it's so new for them to recognize because I think so many automatically see the child or the young adult and think, where's your guardianship papers? Who's your guardian? And I have families who have like they get a little nervous with their decisions not to go that route because they don't think that the supported decision making or the power of attorney is going to hold up. And I said, no, you stand your ground and show them. You have every right to be their supporter and not their guardian. You did nothing wrong. So I think just that reinforcement from, all of us in their support circle to remind them that it's perfectly fine and we love that.
And it is new. I think it's a societal shift, right?
Yes.
Everybody in society needs to start, as a society, we need to embrace that everyone, it's a basic human right to make your own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
And, we all need support, and people with disabilities need more or different types of support, which includes all of their tools, all the wonderful tools. Families tell me, well, what are those tools? And I say, well, look at the accommodation section of your IEP.
Yep, there you go, right back there.
But that's like that mind shift, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we transfer those great things that students are using in schools that support them in school? Well, those are the same supports they can have as adults.
Right.
In addition to the agreements, like who will support me with what decisions, what tools do I need? Right. So my daughter is plain language. She needs about a 4th or 5th grade text. It's okay if they don't provide it, but give us time. Let's see if we can find something. Pretty good at simplifying on the fly myself, but it's not unreasonable for an individual with a disability to say, this is jargon for me.
Yeah.
Can you simplify it for me? Can I get a simplified text, that explains it to me?
And I know I have one family who the son was nonverbal, but he could pick from pictures. He needed visuals. So that was what they put in theirs. And I know one question that comes up from families is, well, is there like a template I can follow in order to make it, so I do it correctly and it looks right?
So there's 2 things that I recommend for families that I think are like commonly. One, the first thing that is commonly used in the state of Maryland is that charting the life course. The DDA uses it, the STAR, the vision, right? The charting the life course and the vision, because that kind of divides the areas of life that an individual might want help or support in. And DDA already uses that tool. Right. So that's what I like about it. We're not inventing the wheel with a new tool. And then the other one, there is, if you go to Disability Rights Maryland's website, and we have it on our website too, there's a sample supported decision-making template.
Right. And I don't know if we have that on our website, Patrick, because I know I've shared it before with parents.
I think the farthest that we go we just have a blurb. We have a blurb that discusses.
I might just have that in my own files to share with families.
Yeah. To your
well,
point.
And we have the link to Parents Place of Maryland, or we're going to link it to the show notes.
And I would, if you go to our website, so it's just www.ppmd.org, go to resources, and then plug in transition. And you'll see all the topics that we're talking about today. There's some resources. We have a fact sheet on self-determination and self-advocacy. We have a fact sheet on turning 18 in Maryland. We have a fact sheet on tips for the transition section of the IEP, tips for having the student be a part of the IEP meeting, which I know is so important. And we have several videos on supported decision making. So yes, many resources.
Yes, I know I've directed parents to your website many a times. It's very easy to follow too, so that helps.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why do you think that some parents think that guardianship is the only option?
So I think it's because many professionals also think it's the only option. So it's the first thing the parents are told. So, and when I say professionals, I mean doctors, nurses, social workers, government workers, school, that type of thing. I think there's a general lack of knowledge. And so it's just the first go-to for everyone. Sometimes I pause and think about everything that a public school special education teacher needs to know. And it's daunting. I mean, it truly, like, it's daunting. And I say that to families. I say, and I've got a taste of that being in this job a little bit, you know what I mean? Because I knew my daughter's needs. And I think that we need to put an emphasis on providing the right type of training that are in front of families. So the professionals that are kind of the everyday face-to-face professionals can get some more training on the options. And of course, training comes with funding. We need funding so the professionals can get the proper training to educate families about the options.
So when you speak about options, what would your advice be to parents as they start the transition process?
So my first advice is always to take a deep breath. It'll be okay. Like, I feel like we can't say that enough. You know?
Yep.
It'll be okay. Take a deep breath. It'll be fine. Here we are. But then my next piece of advice is to start with the end in mind, which is hard. It's like I'm immediately telling parents to do the hardest task. But I use myself as an example because I think sometimes that's easier because parents are always just tell me what you did. Now I always do that with the asterisk, which is this is my child and my journey. Probably at the earliest possible age, I knew that I wanted my daughter to have gainful employment. I also knew that when I looked at all the areas of academics, there was nothing more important to me than reading. So what I'm saying is pick your priorities early because I knew that reading was very important for my daughter's future because I was like, it's reading is kind of the access. I placed that as high importance every year at that IEP meeting. But that was easy for the IEP team to understand. Some parents are like, well, they're educators. Well, no, they know that. But what specifically about reading? Well, I wanted my daughter to have functional reading so she could go in a restaurant and order a meal. I wanted her to be able to read signs. I knew that the more that she could read, the more that other people would see her as a competent adult and she'd be safer. And so when I explained that to the team, when I said, the more functional her reading skills, her better outcome in life, which a lot of fourth grade teachers aren't thinking about that, as they shouldn't be. That was my role in that IEP team, to really tie into the teacher the so what. Why am I saying this is important this year? And what are we going to do? You know, what are the goals this year for that? So what I'm saying here is if you start with once you can get over that blocker, oh, this is scary, I don't want to think about the future, you start to have aha moments that the IEP meetings get easier. Oh, okay. The team understands. Team understands why we want to work on this. Okay. If it makes sense, if everybody in the team agrees that this is a good idea, we can go forward. That's why when I tell families, begin with the end in mind so you can make those preparations along the way, right? When my daughter was in ninth grade, we built in opportunities for self-advocacy for that very reason, right? I wanted her to practice not only at home, but in school, making choices. So we do a training called Guiding the Journey, and we help families kind of craft a vision for their child's future. It really has been very, very helpful for many families to help take those first steps to start thinking about the future at a young age.
Yeah.
And I also tell families, don't be afraid to ask any question. Ask any question you want
Hmm.
of anybody, and
Repeatedly.
repeatedly. And it's fine if people don't know the answer. We'll all help come up with the answers together. Don't be afraid to take those first steps to think about your child's future so you can plan.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I always try to have parents kind of envision what life will be after school, after the bus stops coming. And I know also when you might not be around, which is a whole nother loaded conversation. But even if they don't want to think about it, putting that seed in their mind early on, gets them to start admitting that might happen.
Mhm.
And you need to come up with a plan. So,
It's true. And we talk to parents about that too and refer them to other places. But it is, that is our journey. That is our journey as parents. The other thing that I'd like to add is that it's extremely important to start including your child as part of the IEP.
yeah,
Wouldn't you guys agree?
absolutely. I mean, that
Yeah.
goes back to their sense of empowerment even, and giving them that chance to be heard. It doesn't matter if they're verbal or nonverbal, whatever form of communication they have, they deserve to be there because they're the ones that the meeting's about.
Hmm. And I guarantee you, I've experienced this. Every parent I've ever talked to has experienced this. Every parent, when their child attends an IEP meeting, always comes up with a surprise takeaway. I mean, I
Hmm.
know you see it too.
Yeah.
Like I get to see my daughter's relationship with her teachers in a way that I I didn't really realize. You know what I mean? I saw their funny little jokes that they have with each other. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
The things that I don't see every day. So I thought about that. And then my daughter at her last IEP meeting called out the principal for not introducing herself. I was like, oh, that was brave. But because she's attended all those years and she knew that that was what we do with the first part of the meeting, she knew that. But just I think even, like I said, my daughter has an intellectual disability, but I think her seeing her parents in a room with her teachers and other people at the school, and then she started putting those two worlds and those lives together. I thought was a huge moment for her. I could tell. I could just tell. So there's things that don't translate on paper because too many parents think, well, my child, that is over their head. They can't understand it. Trust me, if your child has an intellectual disability, there are going to be meetings about their lives for the rest of their life.
That's a great point because my sister has an intellectual disability and she's 44. And they have their if she's in New York, I think it's the IFSP meeting every year, and her job coach comes. And to this day, she sits there like straight up, very confident, loves hearing what her job coach says, and kind of like your daughter would correct them if they forgot something or said something, wrong. But she's so used to it, and it started back in school. So it's so nice for her to be able to sit there and contribute. And sometimes she blows my parents away with when they ask her, what would you like to see moving forward this year? And my parents are like, well, I had no idea she was interested in working more on that. And I said, well, that's why it's important for her to be there.
Right, exactly. And that's what takes me to also this other point about making decisions is that what people say the dignity of risk. I don't know about you, but I've made a few bad decisions in life.
Right? Yep.
So, are people with disabilities allowed to make bad decisions? You betcha they are. They should be.
Yep.
We can overprotect, because we learn from our bad decisions. We have to learn to accept the consequences sometimes of our bad decisions. Hopefully they're small, but it's a natural part of gaining adult life skills is learning from bad decisions. We've let my daughter do a few of those. And I mean, my knuckles were white. I I had to take some deep breaths, but I just said, you know what? This is not going to work out well, but it was her bad decision to make. And it was silly. In hindsight, it was absolutely silly. I'm lucky in that I have two children that are 2 years apart. And so I have a really good reminder of what I let my son do, but not my son doesn't have a disability. He's 17, my daughter's 19, that I don't let my daughter do. And even he checks me. But you've got to build the safety and the skills. What I'm referencing right now is social media, which is a big one
Yes.
right now, big topic right now, because there is danger. There is potential for harm, but it's how all of her peers communicate. So
Yep.
I'm sure you've had those conversations a few times with parents.
Oh, yes. I've experienced it with some of my students. So it's out there.
But I think maybe if I could say one more thing, that if you're thinking about what to do at 18, please explore, reach out to us or anyone else for more information about supported decision making. How about, I'd just like to
Absolutely.
say that one thing.
I agree. And I know it's a topic that we will constantly go back to promote and discuss, and maybe do like another conversation on, because it's such an important topic.
We would love the information from this and all our other discussions to reach as many families as possible, and we need your help to do that. So please like, follow, and share out our podcast. You can find our conversations on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, and that's just naming a few. So please share and share often. You can always find the links to the information from this discussion in our show notes. Check out our YouTube channel. We've done some of the legwork for you by curating videos of topics that revolve around transition. We have playlists that cover guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, ABLE accounts, and there's still more to come as we're finding videos that we think will be valuable to use. So please be sure to subscribe there as well. And then finally, check out our website, which is full of information and links to resources around the transition process. So make sure to go to www.postsecondarytransition.com. We thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us and look forward to talking again soon.
Yes, definitely.